That evening, the fluorescent hum of the Sunoco station felt different. Sharper, more insistent. Robert, with his receding hairline and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, handed me a stack of tax forms, a mundane anchor in a sea of growing unease. Then a red vest with the Sunoco logo. It felt heavy, almost suffocating as I pulled it on. Just a quick tour. Robert chirped, his voice echoing strangely in the empty aisles. He showed me the register, a relic from another era, its buttons worn smooth. Punch numbers here, take cash here. He pointed to a dusty corner. Cleaning supplies are back there. His movements were too quick, his explanations too brief. It was less a tour, more a hurried dismissal. Bruce should be here any minute, Robert said, checking his watch, a nervous tick I hadn't noticed before. He's been working nights here for 20 years. Listen to him. He knows what he's talking about. The words hung in the air, thick with an unspoken warning. He knows what he's talking about. What exactly did he know? With that cryptic statement, Robert was gone, leaving me alone in the buzzing silence, the scent of stale coffee and cheap air freshener clinging to the air. 10 minutes later, the front door chimed a sound that now felt less welcoming and more like a tolling bell. Bruce entered. He was a man carved from granite, and shadows his face a roadmap of deep lines etched by time and something else. Something that spoke of long, lonely nights. His gray hair was cut short, almost military, and his hands, rough and calloused, looked like they could crush stone. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a greeting. He just nodded, once his eyes dark and unreadable sweeping over me. "You the new guy?" His voice was a gravelly rasp like sandpaper on old wood. It sounded like he'd spent decades smoking or perhaps screaming. "Yeah, James Wilson." I offered, extending my hand. He ignored it. My hand hung awkwardly in the air for a moment before I slowly, self-consciously lowered it. "Robert, give you the rundown." He grunted, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond me on the flickering fluorescent lights. "Just the basics, register cleaning, stuff like that." "Yeah, pretty much," I mumbled, feeling a prickle of unease. His presence was heavy, oppressive. Bruce let out a low, guttural sound that might have been a laugh or perhaps a sigh of profound weariness. "That's not what matters." He reached into his pocket, his movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was old, creased, and looked like it had been handled countless times. "These are the rules. Learn them. Follow them. No exceptions." He held it out to me. My fingers brushed against his as I took the paper. His skin felt cold like marble. I unfolded it. The handwriting was neat, almost meticulous, but cramped as if the writer had been desperate to fit every word onto the small sheet. The rules. Lock the doors at 1:30 a.m. sharp. Do not unlock them until 5 a.m., no matter what you see or hear. If anyone asks for lucky strikes, turn on the beer cooler light count to 10, then say, "We're out." If a tall biker in black leather comes in after midnight, give him a pack of Marlboro and the most expensive whiskey without being asked. If you see someone on the security camera who isn't physically in the store, call this number immediately, 5555-173. If a black car parks but no one gets out, don't look at it. I read through the list once, then again, my eyes scanning each line, searching for the punchline. This had to be a joke, a weird hazing ritual for the new guy. I waited for Bruce to crack a smile, to wink, to tell me it was all a big prank. He didn't. His face remained a mask of grim seriousness. "What is this?" I asked, waving the paper, my voice a little too high. "The rules," Bruce said flatly, his eyes dark and ancient, finally meeting mine. They held no warmth, no humor, only a deep, unsettling knowledge. "Follow these exactly, or you won't last a week." "Are you serious?" I scoffed, a nervous laugh bubbling up. "What happens if someone asks for lucky strikes and I just give them to them?" Bruce's eyes narrowed, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something flicker within their depths, a cold, hard glint that sent a shiver down my spine. "You won't do that. Not if you want to keep working here." I tried to ease the tension, to make light of the absurdity. "Come on, man, what's the real deal with these rules?" "That is the real deal." His tone left no room for argument. It was a statement, not a discussion. "Robert lets me handle the night shift my way because my way works. You want this job, you follow the rules." I pocketed the paper, the worn creases digging into my palm. It was easier to humor him than argue, especially with my empty wallet screaming at me. "Sure, whatever you say." Bruce spent the next hour showing me the security system. The monitors flickered with grainy images of empty aisles, the gas pumps, the desolate parking lot. He pointed out the panic button, a small red, unassuming thing under the counter. "Only use this if you absolutely have to," he warned, his voice low. "It's a last resort." The whole time he kept glancing at the windows, his head turning slowly, methodically, like a predator scanning its territory. His eyes lingered on the darkness outside, as if expecting someone or something to appear at any moment. The air grew heavy with his unspoken apprehension. "I'll be back tomorrow night to check on you," Bruce said as he left, his voice a little softer, almost a warning. "Stay behind the counter as much as possible." The door chimed shut behind him, leaving me alone in the echoing silence. I pulled out the rules again, the paper feeling strangely warm in my hand. I read them over, the words now seeming less like paranoid ramblings and more like a chilling prophecy. The whole thing seemed like the paranoid ramblings of a weird old man who'd been working alone at night for too long. I tucked the paper under the register, a flimsy shield against the growing unease, and decided not to worry about it. Not yet. The first 2 evenings passed without incident. A deceptive calm. I served customers, stocked shelves, and scrolled through social media when business was slow. The rules tucked away beneath the register became a forgotten whisper, a strange dream I'd almost convinced myself wasn't real. On my third night, things changed. It was a slow Wednesday in December. The cold had kept most people home, and I'd only had a handful of customers after 10:0. The silence in the store grew thick and heavy, punctuated only by the low hum of the coolers and the distant hiss of tires on the highway. By 1 a.m., I was utterly alone in the store, watching YouTube videos on my phone. The screen a small, comforting rectangle of light in the vast, quiet space. The clock on the wall, a cheap digital display, clicked over to 1:30 a.m. My eyes flickered to it, then to the front doors. Rule number 1, lock the doors at 1:30 a.m. Sharp. I paused, a fleeting thought of Bruce's grim face crossing my mind. I couldn't see any reason not to, and Robert might come by to check. A simple, logical action. I walked around the store, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, casting long, distorted shadows. The deadbolts on both the front and side entrances clicked into place with a satisfying metallic thud. The sound echoed in the sudden, profound quiet of the locked building. Back at the register, I settled in for the final hours of my shift, the silence now feeling less empty and more watchful. At 1:47 a.m., I heard it. A soft but distinct tapping sound. It came from the front of the store, from the glass doors I had just locked. Tap, tap, tap. My head snapped up from my phone. Through the glass doors, obscured by the faint reflection of the store lights, I could see someone standing outside. At first glance, it looked like a person. Maybe a customer who hadn't noticed we were closed. My hand instinctively started to rise, ready to wave them away to mouth, "We're closed." But then something about their outline made my skin crawl. Every hair on my arms stood on end. Their proportions were wrong, terribly, fundamentally wrong. The arms hung too low, nearly reaching the knees, swaying slightly with an unnatural rhythm. The neck bent at an angle that would snap human vertebrae, a grotesque twist that made my own neck ache in sympathy. And though I couldn't make out a face in the darkness beyond the glass, I could feel it. I could feel its gaze, a cold, unwavering stare that pierced through the glass and into my very being. It was watching me. Tap, tap, tap. Its finger, long and bent like a broken pencil, tapped against the glass. It tapped with mechanical precision, never changing rhythm or force. A relentless, maddening sound. I backed away from the counter slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. Every instinct screamed at me not to approach the door, not to get a closer look. My breath hitched in my throat. The air in the store suddenly felt thin, cold. I stumbled backward, my legs feeling like jelly, until I reached the back office. The security monitors glowed with a sickly green light, showing every angle of the store and parking lot. My eyes darted to the screen displaying the front entrance. On camera, the thing looked even more unnatural. Its movements were jerky, disjointed like a puppet on tangled strings. It circled the building, a silent, grotesque dance, trying each door, each window. Tapping, always tapping. The cameras didn't capture its face, just a blur where features should be a swirling void that hinted at something unspeakable. For 17 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the monitor, each second stretching into an eternity. The thing continued its circuit of the building, a relentless, silent siege. My eyes were glued to the screen, unable to look away, unable to breathe properly. Then at 2:04 a.m., it simply walked away. Its movement was still wrong, still disjointed as it shuffled into the darkness beyond the parking lot lights. It didn't run, it didn't hurry. It just receded, swallowed by the night. I spent the rest of my shift in that office, huddled in the corner, watching the monitors, holding the crumpled paper of Bruce's rules in my trembling hand. The silence of the store, once merely quiet, now felt like a suffocating blanket filled with the phantom echoes of that relentless tapping. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every creak of the old building sounded like footsteps. When morning came, a pale, weak light filtering through the windows, I practically ran to my car. But I didn't leave. I waited. I waited for Bruce. He pulled into the parking lot, his old pickup truck crunching on the gravel. He took one look at my face, pale eyes wide, probably still etched with terror, and nodded knowingly. "You saw something last night," he said. Not a question, a statement of fact. I told him everything. The tapping, the figure with its impossible proportions, how long it stayed. Bruce didn't seem surprised. He didn't tell me I was crazy or that I must have been tired and seeing things. He just nodded again, his gaze distant as if reliving his own encounters. "That's why we have the rules," he said simply, his voice low and grave. And in that moment, a cold, undeniable certainty settled in my gut. The other 4 rules weren't jokes either. Something was very wrong with this gas station, and if I wanted to make it through winter break, I needed to take Bruce's warnings seriously. More than seriously. I needed to live by them. 5 days into my new job at the Sunoco, and I'd gotten pretty good at jumping at shadows. That thing with the tapping at the window had changed everything. Bruce's rules weren't some weird hazing ritual or the paranoid ramblings of a night shift lifer. They were a survival guide. I kept the folded paper in my pocket, now its edges softening with constant handling, taking it out occasionally to review the list. Having it with me made me feel safer, a flimsy talisman against the encroaching darkness when I was alone in the store at night. The first rule was easy enough to follow: lock the doors at 1:30 a.m. sharp. I'd been doing that religiously since the window tapper's visit, the metallic click of the deadbolts a small comfort. The 5th rule too, don't look at black cars if no one gets out, hadn't been tested yet, thankfully. But the others were always on my mind, a low hum of anxiety beneath the surface of my thoughts. Particularly number 2, if anyone asks for lucky strikes, turn on the beer cooler light count to 10, then say we're out. It seemed oddly specific, almost whimsical, and I wondered when or if I'd ever need to use it. December 20th turned out to be just another quiet night at the Sunoco, a Tuesday. The temperature had dropped below freezing, and the roads were nearly empty, slick with a thin layer of ice. I had served only a handful of customers since my shift began, mostly truckers filling their thermoses with burnt coffee before continuing their long hauls across Iowa. The hours crawled by, marked only by the occasional chime of the door and the rhythmic hum of the coolers. Around 10:00, I decided to make myself useful by restocking the candy aisle. The mindless task of arranging Snickers and M&M's packets kept my hands busy, while my mind wandered to the essay I needed to finish over break. Something about symbolism in Melville that I'd been putting off for weeks. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a sickly yellow glow on the colorful wrappers. By 11:00, the station had been empty for over an hour. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant drone of a semi-truck on the highway. I was scrolling through Instagram, looking at photos of friends enjoying their vacations in places much warmer than Cedar Rapids, a pang of envy twisting in my gut when the front door chimed. I glanced up. A man in a gray business suit stepped inside. There was nothing immediately unusual about him. Average height, well-dressed, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone used to being in charge. But something about the way he moved seemed too precise. Each step covered exactly the same distance, his feet landing with an almost imperceptible click. His head turned in stiff robot-like movements as he looked around the store, his gaze sweeping over the aisles with an unnerving thoroughness. He walked down the chip aisle, picked up a bag of plain potato chips, examined it for a moment, and set it back down in the exact same spot. He repeated this with a candy bar in the next aisle, his fingers brushing the wrapper with an almost clinical detachment. Not once did his facial expression change. It was utterly blank, devoid of any emotion. The back of my neck prickled with unease. This wasn't normal browsing. This was something else. After a few minutes of this strange, silent browsing, he approached the counter. Up close, I noticed more details that made me even more uncomfortable. His suit looked like something from the 1950s. Well-made, expensive, but oddly dated, as if plucked from a time capsule. His skin had an artificial smoothness to it, like polished plastic, almost too perfect. There were no pores, no blemishes, just an unsettling, waxy sheen. "Good evening," he said. The words were perfectly pronounced, each syllable articulated with chilling precision. But there was no warmth in them, no humanity. His voice was flat, devoid of inflection, like a recording. "I would like to purchase a pack of Lucky Strikes, please." My stomach dropped. Rule 2. This was Rule 2 happening right in front of me. The air in the store suddenly felt heavy, thick with an unseen presence. The man's eyes locked on mine and I almost backed up. They didn't look real, just empty and lifeless. They were flat and dead, staring at me without blinking, like two pieces of polished glass. There was no light, no depth, no soul behind them. "Lucky Strikes," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to sound normal. My hand, trembling slightly, moved to the beer cooler light switch under the counter. I flipped it on, watching as the neon sign in the back of the store buzzed to life, casting a faint, sickly green glow. 1, 2, 3. The man didn't blink. Not once. His gaze remained fixed on me, unwavering, unnerving. 4, 5, 6. His head tilted slightly, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, like a bird studying something curious. 7, 8, 9. I suddenly became acutely aware of how alone I was in this gas station. How far away help would be if I needed it. The silence pressed in, amplifying the frantic beat of my own heart. 10. "Sorry," I said, forcing a casualness into my voice that felt utterly false. "We're out." For several long seconds, the man didn't move, didn't speak, just kept those glass eyes fixed on me, a silent, terrifying stare. I was sweating now, cold drops forming on my forehead, trickling down my temples. The air felt thick, suffocating. Finally, his lips parted, a slow, deliberate movement. "I see. Thank you anyway." Each word was carefully enunciated, as if he'd learned human speech by reading a textbook by rote memorization without truly understanding its meaning. He turned and walked out, his movements still unnaturally fluid, each step perfectly measured. The door chimed, a sound that usually signaled a new customer, but now felt like a final, chilling punctuation mark. I let out a big sigh, a shaky, ragged breath that felt like it had been trapped in my lungs for an eternity. My legs felt weak, my hands still trembled. The security camera behind the counter gave me a view of the parking lot. The man got into a beige sedan, an old model but impeccably clean, and just sat there. No movement, no attempt to start the car. Just sitting perfectly straight, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring forward. For exactly 10 minutes he remained that way. I timed it on my phone, unable to look away from the monitor, a morbid fascination holding me captive. Then, without any visible change in how he looked, without a single flicker of light or sound, he started the car and drove away, keeping a perfect, unvarying speed as he went down the highway, disappearing into the night. I spent the rest of my shift jumping at every sound, checking and rechecking the security monitors, my eyes darting to every shadow. When 5:00 a.m. came, I practically ran to my car, the cold morning air, a welcome shock against my clammy skin. The next evening I arrived early. Bruce was already there, counting cigarette cartons behind the counter, his movements precise and practiced. He nodded at me as I hung up my coat, a silent acknowledgement. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, trying to mask the lingering terror. "Something weird happened last night." Bruce glanced up briefly, his eyes meeting mine for a fraction of a second, then returned to his inventory sheet. "Weird how? A guy came in asking for Lucky Strikes." His pen stopped moving, and I did what the rule said. Turned on the cooler light, counted to 10, told him we were out. I leaned against the counter, my voice dropping to a whisper. Bruce, what would have happened if I hadn't followed the rule? His expression darkened, the lines in his face seeming to deepen, pulling his features into a grim mask. He sat down, his clipboard resting on his lap, and looked at me properly for the first time. His gaze was heavy, ancient, filled with a weariness that went beyond mere fatigue. "Kid," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Some questions are better left unanswered. Just follow the rules and you'll make it to the end of break." "That's not good enough." I pressed a desperate need for understanding, overriding my fear. I deserve to know what I'm dealing with here. Bruce sighed a long, drawn-out sound, rubbing a calloused hand over his face. You ever hear the saying, knowledge is a burden? He looked at me, his eyes holding a profound sadness. Trust me when I say you're safer not knowing some things. That guy, his eyes weren't right. They looked like painted glass because they were. Bruce went back to his counting, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. The finality in his voice was absolute. I stood there for a bit, wanting to ask for more information, wanting to demand answers, but remembering the tapping at the window, the wrongness of that figure in the darkness. Maybe Bruce was right. Maybe some mysteries were better left unsolved. As he headed out for the night, Bruce paused at the door, his hand on the frame. He looked back at me, and for a second, his face held a flicker of something I hadn't seen before. Worry. You did good following the rule. Keep doing that. He paused again, his gaze sweeping over the dimly lit store. This job ain't worth dying over. With those encouraging words, he walked out, leaving me alone with the buzz of the coolers and the quiet beep of the security system. I pulled Bruce's rules from my pocket and read them again, the paper now feeling less like a burden and more like a lifeline. I wondered what other horrors were waiting to test the remaining 3. This wasn't just a job anymore, it was a test of survival. And I'd only begun to understand the rules of the game. The days blurred into a monotonous cycle of classes, studying, and the creeping dread of my night shifts at Sunako. Each evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, a cold knot of anxiety would tighten in my stomach. Bruce's rules were no longer just a list. They were a litany whispered in my mind, a constant reminder of the thin veil between the mundane and the monstrous. I'd survived the window tapper and the man with glass eyes, but the remaining rules loomed, particularly number 3. If a tall biker in black leather comes in after midnight, give him a pack of Marlboro and the most expensive whiskey without being asked. It was so specific, so oddly generous. What kind of biker demanded such a tribute? And why? It was a Friday night, a few days before Christmas. The air outside was biting, a sharp wind rattling the glass doors. The station was quiet, the usual Friday night rush of last-minute travelers and late-night snackers strangely absent. By 12:15 a.m., the only sound was the low hum of the refrigerators and the distant mournful howl of the wind. I was behind the counter trying to focus on a textbook, but my eyes kept darting to the front door, to the security monitors. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every creak of the old building sounded like a footstep. Then the front door chimed. A figure stepped inside, silhouetted against the harsh glare of the parking lot lights. He was impossibly tall, easily over 6.5 feet, his frame broad and muscular, filling the doorway. He was clad head to toe in black leather, a heavy worn jacket, chaps, and thick scuffed boots. A black helmet, equally worn, was tucked under his arm. His presence was immediate, overwhelming, sucking the air out of the room. My heart hammered against my ribs. Rule 3, this was him, the tall biker. He walked with a slow, deliberate gait, each heavy bootfall echoing in the silent store. He didn't look around, didn't glance at the aisles. His eyes, even from a distance, were fixed on me, a gaze that felt like a physical weight. As he approached the counter, the details became horrifyingly clear. His face was a nightmare. It wasn't human. His skin, where it wasn't covered by a sparse dark beard, was a mottled greenish-gray, stretched taut over sharp, angular cheekbones. But it wasn't just the color. It was the texture. Small, iridescent scales like those of a reptile shimmered faintly under the fluorescent lights, particularly around his temples and jawline. They caught the light, reflecting it in tiny, unsettling flashes. His nose was flat, almost non-existent, and his lips were thin, pulled back in a permanent, unsettling sneer that revealed teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. And his eyes were entirely black, like polished obsidian, reflecting nothing, absorbing all light. They were ancient, cold, and utterly devoid of anything resembling human emotion. He stopped directly in front of the counter, his immense height forcing me to crane my neck to look at him. The air around him felt colder, heavier, carrying a faint metallic scent like ozone after a lightning strike. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just stood there, those black reptilian eyes boring into mine, a silent, terrifying demand. My mind raced, a frantic scramble of fear and the desperate need to remember the rule. Marlboro. most expensive whiskey, without being asked. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely move them. I reached for the Marlboro display, my fingers fumbling with the packs. I grabbed one, the red and white box, feeling impossibly heavy in my trembling hand. Then I turned to the liquor shelf behind me. My eyes scanned the bottles, searching for the most expensive one. My gaze landed on a dusty bottle of single malt scotch, its price tag significantly higher than anything else. I placed the Marlboro and the scotch on the counter. The biker's black eyes followed my every movement, unblinking. He still hadn't made a sound. The silence was deafening, broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart. He reached out a hand. His fingers were long, unnaturally slender, and tipped with thick black nails that looked more like claws. As his hand moved, the scales on his skin seemed to ripple, catching the light in a grotesque dance. He picked up the Marlboro pack, his movements slow and deliberate, then the whiskey bottle. He didn't offer money. He didn't say thank you. He just held them, his black eyes still fixed on me. Then he turned. Slowly, deliberately. He walked back towards the door, his heavy boots making no sound on the tiled floor. He didn't look back. He simply stepped out into the biting cold, disappearing into the darkness as silently as he had arrived. The door chimed a final chilling punctuation mark. I stood there frozen. My breath caught in my throat. My entire body was trembling, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that started in my core and spread outwards. I could still feel the weight of his gaze, the coldness of his presence. I could still see those black, scaled eyes. I stumbled back to the security monitors, my legs threatening to give out. The camera showed the parking lot. The biker was already on his motorcycle, a massive black machine that seemed to hum with an unnatural power. He kicked it to life, the engine roaring to life with a sound that was too deep, too guttural for a normal bike. He didn't put on his helmet. He just rode off, a dark, hulking silhouette against the faint glow of the distant city lights, disappearing down the highway at an impossible speed. I spent the rest of my shift in a cold sweat, every shadow a potential threat, every distant sound a harbinger of something unspeakable. The image of his scaled face, his black eyes, was burned into my mind. I kept touching my own skin, checking for scales, for any sign of wrongness. When Bruce arrived the next morning, he found me pale and shaken, clutching a half-empty coffee cup. He took one look at me, his own face grim. "The biker?" he asked, his voice low. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. Bruce sighed, a long, weary sound. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver coin. He pressed it into my palm. It was cold heavy. "Keep this with you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It won't stop them, but it might distract them for a moment." He didn't explain what "them" meant or what the coin was for. He didn't need to. I looked at the coin, then at Bruce. His face a mask of grim determination. He knew. He knew what was out there. And he knew I was now truly, irrevocably a part of it. The gas station wasn't just a job, it was a gateway, and I was standing right in the middle of it. The silver coin Bruce gave me felt like a lead weight in my pocket, a constant cold reminder of the biker with scales. It didn't offer comfort, only a deeper sense of dread. Each night at Sunoco became a tightrope walk over an abyss I couldn't see, each chime of the door a potential trigger for another terrifying encounter. I was living by Bruce's rules, a desperate prayer against the unknown, but the fear was a constant companion, a cold hand gripping my heart. The fourth rule: if you see someone on the security camera who isn't physically in the store, call this number immediately. 555-173 was the one that haunted me most. It implied a presence that defied physical reality, a ghost in the machine, and the thought of it made my skin crawl. I'd memorized the number, a string of digits that felt like a lifeline to a world I didn't understand. It was a particularly bleak Tuesday night, a week before Christmas. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with unspoken snow, and the wind howled like a hungry beast. The station was deserted, the only light coming from the flickering fluorescence inside and the distant glow of the highway. I was behind the counter trying to distract myself with a crossword puzzle, but my eyes kept drifting to the security monitors, a nervous habit I couldn't break. The clock on the wall read 1:17 a.m. I was just about to get up and lock the doors, a ritual that now felt less like a chore and more like a desperate plea for safety, when my gaze snagged on monitor 3. It showed the gas pumps, the desolate stretch of asphalt, and the dark, empty fields beyond. But it wasn't empty. A woman stood by pump number 2. She was tall and slender, dressed in a long, flowing red coat that seemed to absorb the dim light, making her stand out against the monochrome backdrop of the night. Her hair, long and dark, cascaded down her back, swaying gently, even though there was no wind visible on the camera. She was facing away from the camera, her back to the store, her posture unnaturally rigid. My breath hitched. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. She was still there, but the front door hadn't chimed. I hadn't heard a car pull up. No headlights. No engine sound. Nothing. I looked up from the monitor, my eyes sweeping the actual gas pumps outside the window. Nothing. The area was completely empty. Just the pumps, the asphalt, and the howling wind. My blood ran cold. Rule 4. If you see someone on the security camera who isn't physically in the store, my hand shot out, fumbling for the phone under the counter. My fingers, slick with sweat, struggled to dial the number Bruce had given me, 555-173. Each digit felt impossibly heavy, each press of the button a monumental effort. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating silence. Then a click. A voice deep and gravelly answered. Yes. It wasn't Bruce. It was a stranger, but the voice held an authority, a chilling calm that cut through my panic. There's a woman, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. On camera 3. Red coat. She's not really here. There was a pause on the other end, a silence that stretched heavy and expectant. Then the voice spoke again, its tone flat, devoid of emotion. Describe her. I did, my eyes glued to the monitor. Tall, red coat, long dark hair, facing away from the store by pump 2. Is she moving? The voice asked. No. I whispered, my eyes wide with terror. She's just standing there. Good, the voice said. Do not approach the window. Do not make eye contact with the camera. Do not acknowledge her presence in any way. Stay behind the counter. I'm sending someone. The line went dead. I dropped the phone, my hand shaking so violently I almost missed the cradle. My eyes were still fixed on monitor 3. The woman in red was still there, a silent, unmoving sentinel. But now, as I watched, a subtle change occurred. Her head slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to turn. My breath caught in my throat. She was turning towards the camera, towards me. No! I whimpered, backing away from the counter, my eyes still glued to the screen. No, no, no. Her head continued to turn, a slow, agonizing rotation. I could feel her gaze even through the grainy pixels of the monitor, a cold, piercing stare that seemed to reach out and touch me. The air in the store grew colder, a sudden, unnatural chill that made my teeth chatter. Then her face came into view. It was a blur. Not a pixelated blur, but a swirling, indistinct mass of shadows and distorted features. It was like looking at a face through rippling water, but the water was made of pure darkness. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a vortex of shifting blackness where a human face should be. And yet I knew she was looking at me. I felt her looking at me. A high-pitched, almost inaudible whine began to emanate from the security monitors, a sound that vibrated in my bones. The image of the woman in red began to distort, stretching and pulling like taffy, her form elongating, becoming impossibly tall, impossibly thin. The red coat seemed to bleed into the darkness around her, a vibrant stain against the encroaching void. Suddenly, the front door chimed again. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound torn from my throat. My eyes snapped from the monitor to the actual front door. Bruce stood there, his face grim, his eyes wide and alert. He wasn't wearing his usual uniform. He was dressed in a heavy dark coat, and in his hand he held something I couldn't quite make out. A small, ornate wooden box. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the security monitors, specifically on monitor 3. He saw her. He saw the woman in red, her distorted form still twisting on the screen. Get down! Bruce roared, his voice a sharp, urgent command that cut through my terror. I dropped to the floor behind the counter, my body trembling uncontrollably. I heard Bruce move his heavy boots thudding on the tiled floor. A strange, guttural chant began to emanate from him, a low, rhythmic murmur in a language I didn't recognize. It was ancient, primal, filled with a raw power that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. Then a sharp crack, like wood splintering, followed by a high-pitched, unearthly shriek that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the air, vibrating in my teeth and my bones. It was a sound of pure agony, pure rage, a sound that was not meant for human ears. The lights in the store flickered wildly, then died, plunging the station into near-total darkness. Only the faint, sickly green glow of the security monitors remained, casting long, dancing shadows. The shriek continued, rising in intensity, a cacophony of pure, unadulterated terror. I huddled on the floor, my hands clamped over my ears, trying to block out the sound, trying to block out the images burned into my mind. The woman in red, her blurred, shifting face, the impossible height. Then silence, abrupt, absolute, the kind of silence that screams louder than any noise. Slowly, cautiously, I lifted my head. The lights flickered back on, bathing the store in their harsh, familiar glow. Bruce was standing by the counter, his back to me, his shoulders slumped. The wooden box was gone. He turned, his face pale, his eyes haunted. He looked exhausted, as if he had just fought a battle that had drained him of every ounce of strength. "She's gone," he rasped, his voice hoarse. "For now." He didn't explain. He didn't need to. I knew. I knew what I had seen. And I knew that Bruce had faced it before. He had a way to deal with these things, these entities that defied reality. But at what cost? I looked at the security monitors. Monitor 3 was blank, just static. The woman in red was gone. But the image of her distorted face, the sound of that unearthly shriek, would forever be etched into my memory. Bruce walked over to the front door and locked it. The familiar click of the deadbolt now sounding less like a comfort and more like a desperate, futile attempt to keep the darkness at bay. He looked at me, his eyes holding a profound weariness. "You called the number," he said, his voice low. "That was good. You followed the rule." He paused, then added, "Some things, they don't like being seen, especially when they're not supposed to be there." He didn't elaborate. He never did. But I understood. The rules weren't just about survival. They were about maintaining a fragile balance, about not provoking the things that lurked in the shadows, the things that existed just beyond the edge of human perception. And I was now deeply, irrevocably entangled in their world. The silver coin in my pocket felt heavier than ever. After the woman in red, the gas station felt different. The air was heavier, colder, even when the heater was blasting. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every creak of the old building sounded like a whisper. Bruce's silver coin, now a permanent fixture in my pocket, felt less like a shield and more like a brand marking me as someone who had seen too much. The rules, once a strange curiosity, were now a sacred text, each line etched into my memory, a desperate prayer against the encroaching madness. The days leading up to Christmas were a blur of restless sleep and waking nightmares. I'd see the woman in red's blurred face in the corner of my vision, hear the unearthly shriek echoing in the quiet moments. Bruce's cryptic warnings about things not liking to be seen replayed in my mind, a chilling mantra. I was exhausted, my nerves frayed, but the need for money for that tuition kept me coming back. It was Christmas Eve. The station was eerily quiet even for a holiday. No last-minute travelers, no desperate shoppers. Just me, the hum of the coolers, and the oppressive silence. The air outside was still heavy with the promise of snow, and the sky was a deep, inky black devoid of stars. I had locked the doors at 1:30 a.m., sharp, the metallic click of the deadbolts echoing in the vast emptiness of the store. Around 2:00 a.m. I started to hear it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound like a soft scratching. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, a subtle rustling as if something was moving just beneath the plaster. I dismissed it at first, attributing it to the old building settling or perhaps a mouse. But it persisted, a low, continuous murmur that slowly, insidiously began to grow louder. It wasn't just scratching anymore. It was a faint rhythmic tapping, like tiny fingers drumming against the drywall. Tap, 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 tap. It seemed to emanate from everywhere at once, surrounding me, pressing in from all sides. I gripped the counter, my knuckles white, my eyes darting around the store. The fluorescent lights seemed to flicker in time with the tapping, casting dancing shadows that stretched and contorted into grotesque shapes. Then the whispers began. At first they were indistinct, a low, sibilant murmur like dry leaves rustling in a forgotten corner. But as the tapping grew louder, the whispers became clearer, coalescing into fragmented words, distorted and guttural, as if spoken through a mouthful of gravel. They seemed to come from the walls, from the ceiling, from the very air around me. I came closer. "We see you alone." My blood ran cold. I pressed my hands against my ears, trying to block out the insidious sounds, but they seemed to penetrate my very skull, vibrating in my teeth and my bones. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence, and a cloying metallic scent like old blood and rust filled my nostrils. I stumbled backward, knocking over a display of candy bars, the plastic wrappers scattering across the floor with a loud clatter. The sound seemed to momentarily startle the whispers, and they receded, replaced by a low guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. My eyes darted to the security monitors. They were all flickering, the images distorted by static, like old television sets struggling to find a signal. On monitor 1, which showed the front entrance, I saw a fleeting glimpse of something moving in the darkness outside. A long, slender shadow, too tall, too thin, slithering past the glass doors. It was gone in an instant, replaced by static, but the image was burned into my mind. The whispers returned louder, now more insistent, weaving together into a chilling chorus. They were no longer just words. They were names. My name. James, James, James. My name spoken by a multitude of voices, some high and reedy, others deep and resonant, all of them laced with an ancient predatory hunger. It was a sound that promised unspeakable things, a sound that stripped away all pretense of safety. I scrambled for the phone, my fingers fumbling with the keypad. I had to call Bruce. I had to call that number. But my hands were shaking too violently and the numbers blurred before my eyes. Suddenly a loud thump echoed from the back of the store near the storage room. It was a heavy resonant sound, like something large and dense hitting the floor. The whispers stopped abruptly. The tapping ceased. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the cacophony that had preceded it. It was a predatory silence, a silence that waited. My breath hitched. I knew I shouldn't go back there. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay put, to hide, to wait for morning. But the curiosity, a morbid, self-destructive urge, pulled me forward. What was back there? What had made that sound? Slowly, cautiously, I crept towards the back of the store, my heart hammering against my ribs. The air grew colder with each step, and the metallic scent intensified, becoming almost unbearable. The shadows seemed to deepen, clinging to the corners, stretching out like grasping fingers. As I approached the storage room door, a faint, sickly green light pulsed from beneath it, casting an eerie glow on the dusty floor. The door itself was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness visible in the crack. From within, I heard a low, wet, squelching sound, followed by a soft, rhythmic drip, drip, drip. I pushed the door open just a crack and peered inside. The storage room was bathed in that pulsing green light emanating from a source I couldn't immediately identify. The air was thick with the metallic scent, now mixed with something else. Something sweet and cloying like decaying flowers. And on the floor in the center of the room was a pile of what looked like discarded clothes, old rags, and something else. Something dark and glistening. It was moving slowly, subtly, as if breathing. And from within the pile, a single unblinking eye the size of a baseball opened. It was a milky white with a pupil that was a vertical slit like a cat's, but too large, too alien. It stared directly at me, a silent, ancient gaze that held no malice, only an unfathomable, terrifying indifference. The drip, drip, drip sound continued, and I realized it was coming from the pile itself. A thick, viscous liquid, dark as crude oil, was slowly oozing from beneath the rags, forming a small, expanding puddle on the concrete floor. I slammed the door shut, my hands trembling so violently I could barely grasp the handle. I leaned against it, gasping for breath, my mind reeling. What was that? What was in there? The whispers returned louder now, pressing against the door, against my mind. It wants out. It knows you. I stumbled back to the counter, my legs feeling like lead. The security monitors were still flickering, but now on every screen, a faint, distorted image of that milky white eye with its vertical slit pupil appeared in the corner, watching me. It was on the front door camera, the gas pump camera, even the camera in the chip aisle. Everywhere, watching. I knew then. This wasn't just a gas station. It was a cage, and something was trying to get out, and I was trapped inside with it. The silver coin in my pocket felt like it was burning a hole through my skin. The image of that milky white eye, its vertical slit pupil staring out from the pile of rags in the storage room, was seared into my mind. It was on every security monitor, a silent, unblinking sentinel watching me. The whispers, though no longer audible, still echoed in my skull, a phantom chorus of my name promising unspeakable things. The metallic, cloying scent of the storage room seemed to cling to my clothes, to my skin, a constant reminder of the horror lurking just beyond that door. Christmas Eve bled into Christmas Day, a holiday I spent huddled in my apartment, the blinds drawn, the lights on, trying to drown out the lingering dread with bad TV and stale pizza. But the fear was a cold, persistent presence, a shadow that clung to me even in the brightest light. Bruce's silver coin felt heavier than ever, a constant reminder of the thin line between my world and whatever lurked in the Sunako. My next shift was 2 nights later. The thought of returning to that place made my stomach churn. But the tuition bill loomed a more immediate, if less terrifying, threat. I arrived early, the winter air biting at my exposed skin, and found Bruce already there, his face a mask of grim determination. He didn't ask about the previous night, didn't mention the storage room or the eye. He just nodded, his eyes sweeping over me, a silent assessment. "You look like hell, kid." He rasped, his voice rougher than usual. "Get some coffee. Strong." I did the bitter liquid, doing little to cut through the exhaustion that permeated my bones. As Bruce prepared to leave, he paused at the door, his hand on the frame. He looked back at me, his gaze heavy, ancient. "Tonight," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "pay attention to the shadows, especially the ones that move when there's no light." He left, and the silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the hum of the coolers. His words hung in the air, a chilling prophecy. Shadows that move when there's no light. What did that even mean? The early hours of my shift passed in a tense, watchful silence. I served a few customers, my movements stiff, my eyes constantly darting to the security monitors, to the corners of the store, to the shadows cast by the shelves. Every creak of the old building, every distant car on the highway made me jump. Around 1 a.m., the station was empty. I walked to the front doors, my hand trembling as I reached for the deadbolts. The metallic click echoed in the vast emptiness of the store, a sound that now felt less like a comfort and more like a trap snapping shut. I returned to the counter, my eyes scanning the monitors. Everything seemed normal. The gas pumps were still, the parking lot empty, the aisles deserted. I tried to focus on my textbook, but the words blurred before my eyes. My mind was a frantic scramble of fear and anticipation. Then I saw it. On monitor 2, which showed the back aisle near the cleaning supplies, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It was too dark, too deep, a patch of absolute blackness that seemed to absorb the faint light from the overhead fluorescence. It stretched, elongated, then began to move. Slowly, deliberately. It flowed across the floor, a silent, undulating ripple of pure darkness, like spilled ink spreading across a canvas. My breath hitched. Shadows that move when there's no light. But there was light. Faint, yes, but present. This shadow was moving despite the light. It flowed towards the shelves, then began to climb, stretching upwards, clinging to the display racks, distorting the familiar shapes of the products. It was formless, yet it seemed to possess a malevolent intelligence, a silent, predatory intent. It reached the top shelf, then flowed across the ceiling, a dark stain spreading across the white tiles. My eyes darted to the actual aisle. Nothing. Just the normal shadows cast by the shelves, still and unmoving. But on the monitor it continued its silent, terrifying journey. It flowed over the ceiling, then down the opposite wall, a dark waterfall of pure shadow pooling on the floor. Then it began to coalesce. Slowly, subtly, the formless darkness began to gather, to thicken, to take on a vague humanoid shape. It was tall, impossibly thin, like a stick figure drawn in pure night. No features, no details, just a silhouette of absolute blackness against the dim light of the store. It stood there for a moment, unmoving, its formless head tilted slightly as if listening. I could feel its gaze, even though it had no eyes, a cold, piercing stare that seemed to bore into my very soul. The air in the store grew colder, a sudden unnatural chill that made my teeth chatter. Then it moved. It didn't walk. It glided. A silent, effortless movement across the floor towards the counter, towards me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating silence. I wanted to scream, but no sound would come. My throat was dry, constricted by terror. I fumbled for the silver coin in my pocket, my fingers closing around its cold, smooth surface. The shadow figure glided closer, its formless shape growing larger on the monitor filling the screen. I could feel its presence now, a suffocating weight, a cold dread that seeped into my bones. It was right outside the counter, a few feet away, a silent, terrifying sentinel. Then a faint, almost imperceptible sound. A whisper. It wasn't in my head this time. It was real. It came from the shadow figure, a low, sibilant hiss that seemed to vibrate through the air. "Give it to me." The words were distorted, guttural, like dry leaves rustling over broken glass. But I understood them. It wanted something. My eyes darted to the silver coin in my hand. Was this what Bruce meant? Was this what it wanted? My hand, trembling uncontrollably, slowly extended, offering the coin. The shadow figure paused, its formless head tilting again, as if assessing my offering. Then a long, slender tendril of pure darkness detached itself from its form. It was like a wisp of smoke, but solid, tangible, reaching out towards my outstretched hand. It was cold, impossibly cold, as it brushed against my skin, sending a jolt of icy dread through my arm. It wrapped around the coin, its touch like 1,000 needles pricking my skin. The silver coin, which had felt so heavy, so solid, suddenly seemed to dissolve, melting into the tendril of darkness, disappearing without a trace. The shadow figure paused for a moment, then slowly, silently, it began to recede. It flowed back across the floor, up the wall, across the ceiling, a dark stain disappearing into the shadows. It flowed back to the corner where it had first appeared, and then with a final, almost imperceptible ripple, it vanished, absorbed back into the wall. The lights in the store seemed to brighten, the air grew warmer, and the oppressive silence lifted, replaced by the familiar hum of the coolers. I stood there, my hand still outstretched, empty. The silver coin was gone. I looked at the security monitors. They were all clear, no static, no distorted images, no milky white eye, just the normal, grainy footage of an empty gas station. But I knew. I knew what I had seen, and I knew what I had given away. The silver coin, Bruce's protection, was gone, and I was more alone than ever. The whispers might have stopped, the shadow might have receded, but the chilling realization settled deep in my gut. I had just paid a price, and I had no idea what I had bought, or what was coming next. The absence of the silver coin in my pocket was a gaping void, a constant chilling reminder of the shadow figure and its silent demand. The air in the Sunako station, once merely heavy, now felt thin, brittle, as if the very fabric of reality had been stretched to its breaking point. Every flicker of the fluorescent lights, every distant creak of the old building, sent a jolt of icy dread through me. Bruce's rules, once a lifeline, now felt like a flimsy set of instructions for navigating a nightmare. The days that followed were a blur of heightened paranoia. I jumped at every sound, my eyes constantly darting to the security monitors, searching for any ripple in the shadows, any distortion in the grainy footage. Sleep offered no escape, only a descent into vivid, terrifying dreams of formless figures and unblinking eyes. The tuition money, once my sole focus, now seemed utterly insignificant compared to the gnawing fear that had taken root in my soul. My next shift was 2 nights after the shadow incident. The thought of returning to Sunako was a cold knot in my stomach, but the alternative, abandoning the job, losing the money, felt like a surrender to the unknown. I arrived early, the winter wind biting at my exposed skin, and found Bruce already there, his face a mask of grim weariness. He didn't ask about the coin, didn't mention the shadow. He just looked at me, his eyes deep and ancient, holding a profound sadness. "You look worse than before, kid." He rasped, his voice a low rumble. "You holding up?" I just nodded, unable to form words. What could I say that I'd given away his protection to a moving shadow? That I was terrified beyond anything I'd ever known? Bruce sighed, a long, drawn-out sound. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn, leather-bound journal. He placed it on the counter, sliding it towards me. "Read this," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Not here. At home. And don't lose it." He left, and the journal sat on the counter, a silent, ominous presence. It was old, its leather cover cracked and faded, its pages yellowed with age. I picked it up, the leather feeling strangely warm against my cold fingers. It felt heavy, not just with its physical weight, but with the weight of untold stories of secrets best left buried. The early hours of my shift passed in a tense, watchful silence. I served a few customers, my movements stiff, my eyes constantly darting to the security monitors. The station was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that hums with unspoken threats. Around 1:45 a.m., after I had locked the doors, the phone behind the counter rang. It wasn't the usual cheerful chime of an incoming call. It was a harsh, grating ring, like a rusty bell tolling in a forgotten belfry. My heart leaped into my throat. No one ever called the station this late. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the receiver. Every instinct screamed at me not to answer. But a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand, compelled me. Slowly, my hand trembling, I picked up the phone. "Hello?" My voice was a shaky whisper. Static. A harsh crackling sound, like dry leaves being crushed underfoot. It filled my ear, a deafening roar that seemed to vibrate through the phone line, through my very bones. It wasn't just normal static. It was alive. It pulsed. It shifted, it seemed to breathe. Then, from within the static, a sound began to emerge. A low, guttural moan. It was deep, resonant, a sound of profound suffering, yet also of immense power. It wasn't human. It was something ancient, something vast, something that had no place on a phone line. The moan grew louder, swelling, filling my ear, pressing against my eardrum. It was accompanied by other sounds, faint at first, then growing clearer. The distant clatter of chains, the wet squelching sound I remembered from the storage room, and a faint rhythmic thump. Thump. Thump, like something heavy being dragged across a rough surface. My hand tightened around the receiver, my knuckles white. I wanted to hang up, to throw the phone across the room, to run. But I couldn't. I was frozen, held captive by the terrifying symphony of sounds emanating from the line. Then a voice. It was barely a whisper, a dry, raspy sound that seemed to scrape against my eardrum, yet it cut through the static with chilling clarity. It was a multitude of voices layered one over the other, speaking in unison, yet each with its own distinct, horrifying timbre. Some were high and reedy, like a child's dying breath. Others were deep and resonant, like the rumble of distant thunder. All of them were filled with an ancient, predatory hunger. "We are here." The words were drawn out, stretched, distorted by the static, yet undeniably clear. "We see you." My breath hitched. My eyes darted to the security monitors. They were all flickering wildly, the images distorting, stretching, pulling like taffy. On every screen, a faint, ghostly outline began to appear. A tall, slender figure, its form indistinct, its features blurred but undeniably present. It was everywhere. In the aisles by the pumps, even in the small, cramped office. It was inside the store. "You let us in." The voices hissed, a collective accusation that pierced through my terror, striking a chord of chilling realization. The silver coin. The shadow figure. I had given it away. I had opened a door. The static intensified, becoming a deafening roar. The moan grew louder, a guttural wail that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The ghostly figures on the monitors solidified, becoming clearer, their forms still indistinct, but their presence undeniable. They were moving slowly, silently, gliding through the store, their blurred forms passing through shelves, through walls, through the very air itself. I slammed the phone down, the harsh clang echoing in the sudden, profound silence. The static stopped. The moaning ceased. The ghostly figures on the monitors vanished, replaced by the normal, grainy footage of an empty gas station. But the silence was even more terrifying than the noise. It was a heavy, expectant silence, a silence that waited. I looked around the store, my eyes wide with terror. The air was still cold, heavy with an unseen presence. I could feel them. I could feel their eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. They were here, inside the store, with me. My gaze fell on the leather-bound journal Bruce had given me. It lay on the counter, a silent, ominous presence. I picked it up, my fingers trembling. This wasn't just a journal. It was a key. A key to understanding what was happening, what I had unleashed. I knew I couldn't stay. Not another minute. I had to get out. But as I looked towards the locked front doors, a chilling thought struck me. If they were already inside, what good would locking the doors do? And what if they didn't want me to leave? The hum of the coolers seemed to grow louder, more insistent, a low guttural growl that vibrated through the floorboards. The shadows in the corners of the store seemed to deepen, to writhe, to stretch out like grasping fingers. I was trapped. And whatever was here, whatever I had let in, was now free. And it was coming for me. The silence after I slammed down the phone was a living thing, a suffocating blanket woven from dread and the lingering echoes of those chilling voices. They were here, inside. I could feel their unseen presence, a cold weight pressing down on me, making the air thick and difficult to breathe. The security monitors, now displaying only static-free, mundane views of the empty store, felt like a cruel joke, a false sense of normalcy. My gaze fell on the leather-bound journal Bruce had given me. It lay on the counter, a silent, ominous presence. It was my only lead, my only hope of understanding what I was truly up against. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to abandon the station, the job, the money, and never look back. But a deeper, more primal urge, a desperate need for answers, rooted me to the spot. I had to know. My hands trembled as I picked up the journal. The leather felt strangely warm, almost alive beneath my fingertips. It was old, its pages yellowed and brittle, filled with Bruce's cramped, meticulous handwriting. The first few entries were mundane, detailing inventory and shift changes. But then the tone shifted. The ink grew darker, the words more urgent, more desperate. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the entries, my heart hammering against my ribs. Bruce had been documenting everything. The strange occurrences, the rules, the entities. He called them the others. His early entries spoke of subtle shifts, objects moving on their own, faint whispers, a pervasive cold. Then the first manifestation, a shadow that detached itself from the wall, just like the one I had seen. He had tried to fight it, to banish it, but it had only grown stronger. He wrote of a pact, a tribute, that had to be paid to keep them at bay, to keep them from fully crossing over. The silver coin. My stomach twisted. I had given away his tribute. He detailed the man with glass eyes, describing his unnerving precision, his flat voice. He wrote of the tall biker, the scales, the ancient predatory hunger in his black eyes. And then, the woman in red. Bruce's entry about her was short, terse, filled with a raw, visceral terror. He described her as a breach, a tear in the veil, and the wooden box he used was a binding tool, a temporary measure to force her back. He wrote of the immense energy it took, the toll it took on him. My eyes scanned further, my breath catching in my throat. Bruce had been here for decades, fighting this silent war, maintaining the fragile balance. He had inherited the burden from the previous owner, a man who had gone mad, muttering about the gate and the hungry ones. The Sunoco wasn't just a gas station. It was a nexus, a thin place where the boundaries between worlds blurred, where things from elsewhere could slip through. And the rules weren't just for safety. They were rituals, specific actions designed to appease, to distract, to temporarily banish the entities that sought to cross over. Then I found the entry from last night. Bruce's handwriting was shaky, almost illegible, smeared with what looked like dried blood. They know the coin is gone. The pact is broken. He gave it to the shadow. Foolish boy. The gate is weakening. They are pushing. I can feel them. They are hungry. So hungry. My blood ran cold. The gate, the pact. I had broken it. I had let them in. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl vibrated through the floorboards, shaking the very foundations of the building. It wasn't from the storage room. It was from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. They seemed to hum with a malevolent energy. The fluorescent lights flickered wildly, then died, plunging the station into absolute darkness. A cold, metallic scent, stronger than ever before, filled my nostrils, thick and cloying like a charnel house. I could hear them now. Not whispers, but a cacophony of wet, squelching sounds, of heavy, dragging movements, of faint, guttural breathing. They were moving through the store, unseen, unheard, yet undeniably present. I fumbled for my phone, its screen a small, pathetic beacon in the overwhelming darkness. I had to call Bruce. I had to warn him. My fingers, slick with sweat, struggled to dial the number. As I brought the phone to my ear, a new sound emerged from the darkness. A low, rhythmic thump. 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 It was slow, deliberate, and it was getting closer. It sounded like something impossibly heavy, something with immense power moving through the aisles. My eyes darted around, trying to pierce the oppressive blackness. I could see nothing, but I could feel it. A cold, immense presence drawing nearer. The thump, thump, thump grew louder, closer. It was right outside the counter now. I could feel the vibrations through the floor. The air grew impossibly cold, and the metallic scent became overwhelming, burning my nostrils. Then a voice. It wasn't the layered whispers from the phone. This was a single voice, deep and resonant, a sound that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the air, vibrating in my chest, in my bones. It was ancient, filled with an unimaginable power, and it spoke in a language that was not meant for human ears. A series of clicks, hisses, and guttural roars that twisted my mind. But then a single word, clear and chilling, cut through the alien sounds. A word I understood. Mine. And then a hand. It emerged from the absolute darkness, impossibly large, impossibly pale, its skin stretched taut over long, slender fingers, tipped with black, razor-sharp claws. It was not a shadow. It was solid, real, and it was reaching for me. It moved with terrifying speed, too fast for me to react. The hand clamped around my wrist, its grip like a vice cold as death, strong enough to crush bone. A searing pain shot up my arm, and I screamed, a raw guttural sound torn from my throat. I tried to pull away to break free, but its grip was absolute. It began to pull slowly, inexorably dragging me across the floor towards the edge of the counter, towards the overwhelming darkness beyond. I could feel the cold, wet floor against my back as I was dragged, the rough tiles scraping against my skin. The metallic scent was suffocating, and the alien voice continued its guttural pronouncements, a terrifying lullaby. I was being pulled into the darkness, into the unknown. The journal still clutched in my other hand slipped from my grasp, falling to the floor. With a soft thud, its pages fluttering open. The last thing I saw before I was completely swallowed by the blackness was a faint pulsing green light from the storage room, illuminating a single milky white eye, its vertical slit pupils staring out unblinking from the pile of rags. It was watching, waiting, and I knew with a chilling certainty that I was not going to make it to morning. The grip on my wrist was absolute, a crushing vice of impossible cold and strength. My scream was swallowed by the suffocating darkness as I was dragged inexorably across the floor, past the counter, and into the vast, echoing blackness of the gas station. The metallic cloying scent intensified, burning my nostrils, and the alien guttural voice continued its terrifying pronouncements, a sound that vibrated through my very bones. My back scraped against the rough tiles, the cold seeping through my clothes, chilling me to the core. I thrashed, kicked, clawed at the unseen hand, but it was useless. It held me with an effortless power, pulling me deeper into the void. The air grew impossibly cold, a biting chill that felt like it was freezing my lungs. I could feel other presences, now unseen forms, brushing against me in the darkness. Wet, squelching sounds surrounded me, accompanied by faint rhythmic thump, thump, thumps closer now, all around me. I could hear heavy, ragged breathing, a chorus of guttural exhalations that seemed to vibrate through the very air. They were all around me, a multitude of unseen horrors, their forms indistinct, their intentions terrifyingly clear. The darkness wasn't just the absence of light. It was a living, breathing entity pressing in on me, suffocating me. I felt a profound sense of disorientation, as if the floor beneath me had vanished, as if I was falling into an endless abyss. The sounds grew louder, more chaotic. A symphony of wet, slithering, soft scraping, and the low, hungry moans that had haunted the phone line. The hand on my wrist tightened, pulling me faster, and I felt a sharp, searing pain as my arm was stretched, pulled almost to its breaking point. I gasped, a ragged, desperate sound, my vision blurring at the edges. I was being pulled towards something immense and terrifying, something that waited in the deepest part of the darkness. Suddenly, a new sensation. A profound, overwhelming cold, far colder than anything I had ever experienced, enveloped me. It was a cold that didn't just chill the skin. It froze the very marrow in my bones. A cold that felt ancient, primordial. And with it, a pressure, an immense crushing weight that pressed down on my chest, making it impossible to breathe. It felt like I was being squeezed, compressed by an invisible, colossal force. I tried to scream again, but only a choked gasp escaped my lips. My vision swam, and pinpricks of light danced before my eyes. I was losing consciousness, succumbing to the terror, the cold, the crushing pressure. Just as the darkness threatened to consume me entirely, a new sound ripped through the air. A roar. It was not a human roar. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated fury, a sound that vibrated through the very foundations of the building, shaking the floor, rattling the shelves. It was deep, resonant, a sound that spoke of immense power, of ancient rage, of something truly monstrous. It was a sound that seemed to tear through the fabric of the darkness itself. The crushing pressure on my chest vanished. The grip on my wrist loosened, then released entirely. I fell, hitting the cold, hard floor with a jarring thud, the impact sending a fresh wave of pain through my body. The alien guttural voice that had been speaking to me shrieked a high-pitched, unearthly sound of pure agony and surprise. The wet, squelching sounds, the heavy breathing, the rhythmic thump, thump, thump. They all ceased abruptly. The overwhelming cold receded, replaced by a sudden, almost painful warmth. I lay there, gasping for breath, my body trembling uncontrollably. My eyes, still adjusting to the sudden shift, struggled to make sense of the chaos. The darkness was still absolute, but now it was punctuated by flashes of light. Not the steady glow of the fluorescence, but brief, blinding bursts of white and green like lightning strikes in a storm. And with each flash I saw glimpses of immense shifting forms too large to comprehend, moving with impossible speed. Glimpses of long dark tendrils lashing out, striking unseen targets. Glimpses of something massive, something with a vaguely reptilian shape, its scales shimmering with an inner light, its form blurred by speed and fury. The roar came again, closer this time, a deafening bellow that vibrated through the floor, through my very bones. It was accompanied by a cacophony of sounds, tearing, ripping, a wet, sickening crunch, and the high-pitched, unearthly shrieks of the unseen entities. It was a battle. A brutal, terrifying battle unfolding in the absolute darkness just feet away from me. I crawled blindly, desperately trying to put distance between myself and the unseen conflict. My hands scraped against the cold, dusty floor, my knees aching. I could feel the vibrations of the struggle, the impact of unseen blows, the frantic movements of impossible beings. Then a sudden blinding flash of green light illuminated the entire store for a split second. And in that fleeting moment, I saw him. Bruce. He was not the tired, weary man I knew. He was transformed. His body was rippling with an unnatural power, his muscles bulging, his skin shimmering with a faint greenish glow. His eyes, usually dark and unreadable, were now blazing with an intense emerald light filled with a primal fury. In his hands he held something, a long, gnarled staff glowing with the same eerie green light, its tip crackling with raw energy. He was fighting the unseen entities. His face was contorted in a snarl of pure rage, his mouth open in a silent roar. He swung the staff, and where it connected, the darkness seemed to recoil, to tear, revealing fleeting glimpses of the grotesque shifting forms of the others. The light vanished as quickly as it appeared, plunging the store back into absolute darkness. But the sounds of the battle continued, even more ferocious now. The roars, the shrieks, the wet tearing sounds. They filled the air, a symphony of cosmic violence. I crawled until my back hit something solid, the base of the counter. I huddled there, trembling, my hands clamped over my ears, trying to block out the terrifying sounds. Bruce was here. He was fighting them. But could he win? And what would be left of him or the gas station when it was over? The battle raged on a maelstrom of unseen forces. Then slowly, gradually, the sounds began to recede. The roars grew fainter, the shrieks more distant. The wet, tearing sounds diminished. The cold began to lift, replaced by a faint, almost imperceptible warmth. Finally, silence. A profound, absolute silence. The kind that follows a great storm, leaving behind only the echoes of its fury. I lay there gasping for breath, my body aching, my mind reeling. The darkness was still absolute. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear anything. Bruce, I whispered, my voice hoarse, barely audible. No answer. Only the faint rhythmic hum of the coolers, a sound that now seemed impossibly loud in the overwhelming silence. And then a new sound, a soft, wet drip. Drip, drip. It was coming from somewhere close by. I tried to move, to push myself up, but my body felt heavy, drained. My hand brushed against something cold and metallic on the floor. I fumbled for it, my fingers closing around a familiar shape. The silver coin. It was back, but it wasn't just cold. It was wet and sticky. I brought it closer to my face, trying to discern its nature in the absolute darkness. My fingers brushed against something rough, something that felt like scales. And then, a faint, sickly green light pulsed from the storage room, illuminating a single milky white eye, its vertical slit pupil staring out unblinking from the pile of rags. It was watching, waiting. And I knew with a chilling certainty that the battle was far from over, and I was still trapped. The silver coin, cold and slick, with something I didn't want to identify, felt like a brand in my palm. Its return was a chilling mystery, a silent testament to the impossible battle that had just raged in the darkness. The faint, sickly green pulse from the storage room, illuminating that unblinking, milky white eye, was a beacon of pure dread. Bruce was gone. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic drip, drip, drip from the storage room and the distant, mournful hum of the coolers. My body ached, every muscle screaming in protest, as I slowly, cautiously pushed myself up. The darkness was still oppressive, but my eyes were beginning to adjust, discerning faint outlines of shelves and counters. The air was thick with the metallic cloying scent, now mixed with something else. Something acrid like burnt ozone and raw meat. "Bruce," I whispered again, my voice hoarse, barely audible. No answer, only the drip, drip, drip. I fumbled for my phone, its screen, a small, pathetic beacon in the overwhelming blackness. The time read 3:47 a.m. Hours had passed since the phone call, since the shadow figure, since the battle. It felt like an eternity. I used the phone's flashlight, its beam cutting a narrow path through the gloom. The store was a wreck. Shelves were overturned, products scattered across the floor, their colorful wrappers stark against the dusty tiles. The air was filled with a fine, almost invisible dust, shimmering in the phone's beam. It looked like a tornado had ripped through the place. My gaze fell on the area where the battle had raged. The floor was slick with a dark, viscous liquid, the same crude, oil-like substance I had seen oozing from the pile in the storage room. It was everywhere, forming grotesque puddles reflecting the phone's light with an unsettling sheen, and mixed within it something else. Fragments of black leather torn and shredded, and scales. Small iridescent scales like those of a reptile scattered across the floor, catching the light in tiny, unsettling flashes. The same scales I had seen on the biker. My stomach churned. "Bruce." I followed the trail of destruction, my heart hammering against my ribs. The trail led towards the back of the store, towards the storage room. The green light from beneath the door pulsed more intensely now, a hypnotic, malevolent glow. The drip, drip, drip was louder, closer. As I approached the storage room door, the metallic, acrid scent became overwhelming, burning my nostrils, making my eyes water. I could hear a faint, wet, slithering sound from within, accompanied by a low, guttural gurgle. I pushed the door open just a crack and peered inside, my phone's flashlight beam cutting through the pulsing green light. The storage room was a nightmare. The pile of rags in the center of the room was larger now, pulsating with that sickly green light. It was no longer just rags. It was a grotesque, amorphous mass of dark, glistening flesh, constantly shifting, expanding, contracting. And from within it, dozens of milky white eyes with their vertical slit pupils opened, unblinking, staring directly at me. They were everywhere, embedded in the pulsating mass, watching. The drip, drip, drip was coming from the mass itself, a thick, dark liquid oozing from its constantly shifting surface, forming a growing pool on the floor. And then I saw him, Bruce. He was half submerged in the pulsating mass, his body twisted at an unnatural angle, his face pale and contorted in a silent scream. His eyes were wide, staring blankly at the ceiling, and his skin, where it wasn't covered by the dark, viscous liquid, was mottled with patches of greenish-gray and scales. Small, iridescent scales, just like the biker's, were beginning to emerge on his skin, particularly around his temples and jawline. His hand, still clutching the gnarled staff, was reaching out, his fingers splayed, as if trying to grasp something to pull himself free. But he was sinking slowly, inexorably into the pulsating mass, becoming one with it. A low, guttural gurgle emanated from the mass, and one of the milky white eyes, larger than the others, embedded near Bruce's head, slowly turned to look at me. It was filled with an ancient predatory intelligence and a chilling, undeniable triumph. I stumbled backward, a raw, guttural scream tearing from my throat. I slammed the door shut, my hands trembling so violently I could barely grasp the handle. I leaned against it, gasping for breath, my mind reeling, threatening to shatter. Bruce. He was gone. Absorbed. Transformed. The whispers returned louder now, pressing against the door, against my mind. "He is ours. You are next." I scrambled away from the door, my legs feeling like lead, my body screaming in protest. I had to get out. I had to escape. But where the front doors were locked, and they were inside. I ran to the counter, my eyes darting around the store. The security monitors were still on, displaying the empty aisles, the gas pumps. But now, on every screen, a faint ghostly outline began to appear. The tall, slender figure of the woman in red, her form indistinct, her features blurred, but undeniably present. She was everywhere, gliding through the aisles, standing by the pumps, even in the small, cramped office. She was inside the store, and she was moving towards me. The air grew impossibly cold, and the metallic, acrid scent intensified, burning my nostrils. I could hear the wet, slithering sounds again, closer now, all around me. The rhythmic thump. Thump. Thump was back, slow and deliberate, approaching from the back of the store. I was trapped, surrounded. My gaze fell on the old, worn, leather-bound journal Bruce had given me. It lay on the counter where I had dropped it, its pages fluttering open. I snatched it up, my fingers fumbling with the brittle pages. I had to find something. Anything. A way out. My eyes scanned the last few entries, Bruce's shaky handwriting blurring before my eyes. He had written about a final resort, a last measure to contain them, to seal the gate. But it came at a terrible cost. A sacrifice. And then I saw it. A diagram. A crude drawing of the gas station layout with strange symbols marked at various points. And a single chilling sentence scrawled beneath it. The heart of the gate is the pump, the oldest one. It must be silenced. My eyes darted to the front of the store, to the gas pumps visible through the large windows. Pump number 1. The oldest one. It stood there silent and unassuming, a mundane object in a world gone mad. The ghostly figures of the woman in red were closer now, their blurred forms gliding through the aisles, their unseen gazes fixed on me. The thump, thump, thump from the back of the store was deafening, shaking the very foundations of the building. I had to get to the pump. I had to silence it. Whatever that meant. It was my only chance. My only hope. But as I looked towards the front doors, towards the only way out, a new sound emerged from the darkness. A low, guttural growl right behind me. I spun around, my phone's flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. And there, standing directly behind the counter, impossibly tall, impossibly broad, was the biker. His black leather jacket was torn and shredded, revealing patches of greenish-gray skin covered in shimmering scales. His black obsidian eyes, devoid of any light, stared directly into mine, filled with an ancient predatory hunger. And in his hand he held a long, gnarled staff glowing with a faint, sickly green light. Bruce's staff. He raised the staff, its tip crackling with raw energy. And then he spoke, his voice a deep, guttural rasp, a sound that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the air. "You will not pass." I was trapped. Between the biker, the ghostly figures, and whatever was still lurking in the storage room. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating silence. This was it. The final confrontation. And I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The biker stood before me, a towering silhouette of scales and shadow. Bruce's gnarled staff crackling with sickly green energy in his hand. His black obsidian eyes, devoid of any light, bored into mine. And his guttural voice, a sound that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the air, echoed in the suffocating silence. "You will not pass." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of pure terror. I was trapped. Behind me, the storage room pulsed with that malevolent green light, the source of the drip, 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 and the unseen horrors within. Around me, the ghostly figures of the woman in red glided through the aisles, their blurred forms closing in, their unseen gazes fixed on me. And directly in front, the biker, a monstrous guardian of this unholy place. The journal clutched in my trembling hand felt like a lead weight. The heart of the gate is the pump. The oldest one. It must be silenced. Pump number 1. It was my only chance. A desperate, suicidal dash through a gauntlet of nightmares. The biker took a step forward, his heavy boot falls silent on the tiled floor. The staff in his hand pulsed brighter, casting grotesque dancing shadows that writhed on the walls. The air around him grew impossibly cold, and the metallic, acrid scent intensified, burning my nostrils. I didn't think. I reacted. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, I lunged to my left. Scrambling around the end of the counter, my eyes fixed on the front doors, on the gas pumps beyond. The biker moved with impossible speed. He swung the staff, a blur of green light and dark wood. I felt a searing pain as it grazed my shoulder, a jolt of raw energy that sent me stumbling, my arm going numb. I cried out a choked gasp, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The ghostly figures of the woman in red were everywhere now, their blurred forms coalescing, becoming more distinct, more terrifying. They glided through the aisles, their long, slender arms reaching out, their formless faces turning towards me. I could feel their cold touch like icy tendrils brushing against my skin, sending shivers of pure dread through me. They didn't grab me, didn't hold me, but their presence was a suffocating weight, a chilling embrace that threatened to drag me down. I ran blindly, desperately weaving through the aisles, knocking over displays, sending products scattering across the floor. The biker was behind me, his heavy, silent footsteps echoing my own frantic pace. I could hear the low, guttural growl emanating from him, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. I burst into the main aisle, the front doors now agonizingly close. The gas pumps were visible through the large windows, bathed in the faint, sickly glow of the parking lot lights. Pump number 1. It stood there, silent and unassuming, a mundane object that held the key to my survival, or my damnation. But the path was not clear. The ghostly figures of the woman in red were converging, forming a shimmering, translucent wall between me and the doors. Their blurred faces turned towards me, and I could hear a faint, high-pitched whine emanating from them, a sound that vibrated in my teeth. I didn't hesitate. I plunged through them, my body passing through their ethereal forms as if through cold smoke. The sensation was horrifying. A sudden, profound chill that pierced me to the bone, a feeling of being violated, of something ancient and unclean passing through my very being. I gasped, a ragged, desperate sound, but I kept running. I reached the front doors, my hands fumbling with the deadbolts. They were locked. Of course. I had locked them myself. My fingers, slick with sweat, struggled with the cold metal, my mind screaming in frustration. The biker was closer now, his heavy footsteps thudding behind me. I could feel his presence, a suffocating weight, a cold dread that seeped into my bones. The ghostly figures of the woman in red were pressing in from all sides, their forms swirling around me, their high-pitched whine growing louder, more insistent. Finally, with a desperate surge of strength, I managed to unlock the deadbolts. The metallic click echoed in the suffocating silence, a sound of both triumph and impending doom. I threw the doors open, bursting out into the biting cold of the winter night. The air outside was a shock, a cold, clean slap that momentarily cleared my head. I didn't look back. I ran blindly, desperately towards the gas pumps. Pump number 1. It stood there, a silent, unassuming sentinel. I reached it, my hands fumbling with the nozzle. What did silence it mean? Pull the hose, break it. Suddenly, a searing pain shot through my back. I cried out, stumbling forward, my hands scraping against the cold metal of the pump. I felt a cold, crushing weight on my back, and a guttural growl vibrated in my ear. The biker. He was on me. His immense weight pressed me against the pump, his scaled arm wrapped around my throat, cutting off my air. His black obsidian eyes, inches from my own, burned with a cold, ancient fury. "You will not touch it!" He rasped, his voice a low, guttural snarl. I struggled, clawed at his arm, but his grip was absolute. My vision blurred, black spots dancing before my eyes. The air was being squeezed from my lungs, and a desperate primal fear seized me. This was it. This was how it ended. But then I saw it. On the side of the pump, a small red emergency shutoff button. It was old, faded, almost hidden by grime, but it was there. Silenced. With a final desperate surge of adrenaline, I twisted, contorted my body, my fingers reaching, stretching, straining towards the button. The biker roared, tightening his grip, his claws digging into my flesh. Pain exploded in my throat, in my back, in my arm. My fingers brushed against the cold plastic of the button. Just a little further. The biker's face was inches from mine, his sharp teeth bared in a silent snarl. His black eyes burned with a triumphant, predatory gleam. He was going to break my neck, but my fingers found the button. With every ounce of my remaining strength, I slammed my thumb down on it. A loud clunk echoed through the silent night. The faint hum of the gas pump died. The small digital display on the pump flickered, then went dark. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low, guttural moan emanated from deep within the ground beneath us. The ground trembled, a faint vibration that grew slowly, inexorably, into a violent tremor. The gas station building groaned, the glass windows rattling, the metal roof creaking under an unseen strain. The biker roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony and rage. His grip on my throat loosened, and he stumbled backward, his scaled body convulsing. His black eyes, wide with terror, darted around as if searching for something in the darkness. The ground beneath us bucked violently. A deep, resonant crack echoed from the gas station building, and a massive fissure, black and jagged, ripped through the concrete of the parking lot, extending towards the highway. The biker shrieked, a high-pitched, unearthly sound, as the ground beneath him split open. He fell, his massive form swallowed by the widening chasm, his screams abruptly cut off as the earth swallowed him whole. The tremors intensified, shaking the entire area. The gas station building groaned again, louder this time, and then with a deafening roar, it began to collapse. The roof caved and the walls crumbled, sending a shower of debris and dust into the night sky. The fluorescent lights exploded, showering the area with sparks. I stumbled backward, falling to the ground, my body aching, my mind reeling. The air was thick with dust and the acrid scent of ozone. The ground continued to tremble, and from the widening fissure, a faint, sickly green light pulsed, illuminating the swirling dust. And then from deep within the earth a new sound emerged. A low, guttural thump. 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 It was rhythmic, powerful, and it was growing louder, closer. It was coming from beneath the ground. I scrambled to my feet, my legs screaming in protest, and looked at the fissure. The green light pulsed brighter, and the thump, thump, thump grew deafening. Something was rising, something immense, something ancient. I turned and ran blindly, desperately towards the highway, towards the distant lights of the city, leaving the collapsing gas station, the widening fissure, and the rising horror behind me. I didn't know what I had done. I didn't know what I had unleashed, but I knew with a chilling certainty that the nightmare was far from over, and I was still running. The roar of the collapsing gas station, the splintering of wood, the shattering of glass echoed behind me as I ran. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. The ground still trembled beneath my feet, a constant, unsettling vibration that spoke of immense power stirring beneath the earth. The air was thick with dust and the acrid scent of ozone, a choking reminder of the chaos I had just unleashed. Behind me, the sickly green light from the widening fissure pulsed brighter, casting grotesque dancing shadows that stretched and contorted across the desolate landscape. The thump, thump, thump from beneath the ground grew louder, more insistent, a rhythmic beat that vibrated through my very bones, a terrifying heartbeat of something vast and ancient. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed at me to put as much distance as possible between myself and that place. The highway, a dark ribbon stretching into the distant glow of the city lights, was my only hope. My breath hitched in my throat, a ragged, desperate sound. The cold winter air burned my lungs with each gasping breath. My shoulder throbbed where the biker's staff had grazed me, a dull, persistent ache that served as a constant reminder of the impossible battle. The thump, thump, thump was deafening now, shaking the very ground beneath my feet. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my worn sneakers, a terrifying rhythm that seemed to synchronize with the frantic beat of my own heart. The green light behind me intensified, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched out, reaching for me like grasping fingers. Then a new sound. A wet, tearing rip followed by a low, guttural gurgle that seemed to emanate from the very earth itself. The ground bucked violently, sending me stumbling, almost falling. I caught myself, my hands scraping against the rough asphalt, and pushed myself forward, my legs screaming in protest. I risked a glance over my shoulder. What I saw made my blood run cold. From the gaping fissure where the gas station once stood, something was rising. It was immense, impossibly vast, a colossal mass of dark, glistening flesh, constantly shifting, expanding, contracting. It was covered in dozens, hundreds, thousands of milky white eyes with their vertical slit pupils opening and closing, blinking in unison, staring out into the night. They pulsed with that sickly green light, illuminating the swirling dust and debris around it. It was the pile from the storage room, but it was no longer contained. It was free, and it was growing. It rose higher and higher, a grotesque pulsating mountain of flesh and eyes, blotting out the stars, casting an immense moving shadow that stretched across the highway, engulfing me in its cold, oppressive darkness. The thump, thump, thump was its heartbeat, a slow, deliberate rhythm that shook the very world. And from its constantly shifting surface, long, thick tendrils dark as crude oil began to lash out, striking the ground, tearing through the asphalt, sending chunks of concrete flying. They were reaching, searching their tips, ending in clusters of those unblinking, milky white eyes. It was coming for me. I ran faster, a desperate primal fear fueling my every step. The highway stretched before me, seemingly endless, the distant city lights a cruel mirage. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead, but I pushed through the pain, through the exhaustion, driven by the terrifying knowledge that if it caught me, there would be no escape. The air grew impossibly cold, and the metallic cloying scent intensified, burning my nostrils, making my eyes water. I could hear the wet, slithering sounds now closer all around me as the tendrils lashed out, tearing at the ground, closing the distance. Suddenly, a tendril thick as a tree trunk slammed down directly in front of me, sending a shower of asphalt and dust into the air. I skidded to a halt, my heart hammering against my ribs, my breath caught in my throat. The tendril pulsed with that sickly green light, and dozens of milky white eyes embedded in its surface stared directly at me, unblinking, filled with an ancient predatory hunger. I scrambled backward, my eyes darting around, searching for an escape. Another tendril slammed down to my left, then another to my right, boxing me in. I was surrounded, trapped. The colossal mass of flesh and eyes loomed over me, blotting out the sky, its immense shadow engulfing me in absolute darkness. The thump, thump, thump was deafening, vibrating through my entire body, threatening to shatter my very bones. And then a voice. It wasn't the layered whispers from the phone or the guttural snarl of the biker. This was a single voice, immense and ancient, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very core of the pulsating mountain of flesh and eyes. It was a series of clicks, hisses, and guttural roars, a language that twisted my mind, promising unspeakable horrors. But then a single word, clear and chilling, cut through the alien sounds. A word I understood. Mine! The tendrils around me began to close in slowly, inexorably, their milky white eyes fixed on me. The air grew impossibly cold, and the metallic cloying scent became overwhelming, suffocating me. I could feel the immense pressure, the crushing weight, as the tendrils pressed in, squeezing, compressing. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound torn from my throat, but it was swallowed by the overwhelming presence of the entity. My vision blurred, black spots dancing before my eyes. I was losing consciousness, succumbing to the terror, the cold, the crushing pressure. Just as the darkness threatened to consume me entirely, a new sound ripped through the air. The blare of a horn. A blinding flash of headlights cut through the oppressive darkness, illuminating the grotesque pulsating mass of flesh and eyes, the lashing tendrils, and my own terrified face. A semi-truck, its engine roaring, its horn blaring, was barreling down the highway directly towards the entity. The colossal mass of flesh and eyes paused, its tendrils retracting slightly, its milky white eyes turning towards the approaching truck. The thump, thump, thump faltered, then resumed faster, now more frantic. The truck didn't slow down. It didn't swerve. It kept coming, a massive, unstoppable force, its headlights blazing, its horns screaming. And then, with a deafening roar of tearing metal and shattering glass, the semi-truck slammed into the base of the colossal entity. A blinding explosion of green light and dark, viscous liquid erupted, sending a shower of debris, scales, and pulsating flesh into the night sky. The ground bucked violently, a massive tremor that sent me sprawling. The air was filled with the acrid scent of burning rubber and something else. Something sweet and cloying like decaying flowers, but intensified 1,000-fold. I lay there gasping for breath, my body aching, my mind reeling. The green light pulsed, then slowly, gradually began to dim. The thump, thump, thump faltered, grew weaker, then ceased entirely. The immense pressure lifted, and the overwhelming cold receded. Slowly, cautiously, I pushed myself up. The dust was beginning to settle, revealing a scene of utter devastation. The semi-truck was a mangled wreck, its front end crushed, its trailer twisted and torn. And where the colossal entity had stood, there was now only a vast smoking crater, filled with dark, glistening liquid, and scattered fragments of pulsating flesh. The sickly green light still pulsed faintly from within the crater, a dying ember in the heart of the abyss. I stumbled to my feet, my legs trembling, and looked at the crater. It was silent now, utterly silent. The nightmare was over. Or was it? As I stood there staring into the smoking crater, a faint, almost imperceptible sound reached my ears. A low, guttural gurgle. It came from the crater, from deep within the dark, viscous liquid. And then a single milky white eye, its vertical slit pupil unblinking, slowly opened from within the depths of the liquid, staring directly at me. It was still there, waiting. I turned and ran blindly, desperately towards the distant city lights, towards anything that resembled normalcy. I didn't know what I had done. I didn't know what I had unleashed, but I knew with a chilling certainty that the nightmare was far from over, and I was still running.